Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to follow up on Mr. Takano's questions. Clearly, he represents a district that's very different than upstate New York. I represent tens of thousands of small family farms. And in fact, these are multi-generational farms. So college-age students do go home to work at the farm and also run those farms. These farms are fighting to hang on. It is a tragedy that family farms have closed over the past decades. We should be making it stronger for domestic agricultural supply and those multi-generational small family farms to exist, not harder. So, Mr. DeCamp, my question is for you. As I mentioned, I do represent tens of thousands of small family farms in upstate New York, and I am very concerned about the implications of mandating the 40-hour work week on farmers and farm workers. As you know, and any farm family knows, and any farm worker knows, the inherent nature of farming calls for long hours, often in very short windows, in order to cooperate with the unpredictable weather and the narrow harvest times. New York State has implemented an overtime threshold for agriculture employers, which has forced many small family farms in my district and throughout the state to cut hours for workers and eliminate labor-intensive crops. Several fruit and specialty crop producers, for example, have cut down fruit trees in order to spare the expense of growing fruit that they cannot hire someone to pick. So my question, Mr. DeCamp, is what is the overall economic impact to U.S. agriculture if farmers had to pay overtime after 40 hours? And what effect would this have on the ability of American farms to maintain a strong domestic food supply?
Well, with the caveat that I'm not an economist and don't claim to be, from a labor incentive standpoint, I think it's fair to say that employers in this industry would face great pressure to do something about the overtime cost, either by spreading the work around, which is the policy behind the FLSA's 40-hour work week, or by having to pay the higher costs and find a way to make do with that, either by raising prices or by having lower profits. I think the reality is it would cause, where possible, farms to employ people for less hours. I could certainly envision situations where farms will employ people for 3 days a week, and then those folks would go to a different farm for the other 2 days a week. The farm workers need the hours. They want the hours. And so I don't think the farm workers would be working less hours. It would be a question of where they'd be doing it.
My next question is related to, and you mentioned this and Mr. Keller did as well, but the fact that we are in a global marketplace when it comes to agricultural products. My district borders Canada, and in many ways, we want to make sure that American farms are not at a competitive disadvantage. Given that proximity to the northern border, we're in direct competition with Canadian farmers for market access, especially for fruit and vegetable products. Canada currently has a lower minimum wage than New York State and exempts agriculture from overtime requirements. And as a result, our upstate New York markets are often flooded with Canadian product, putting our New York and American farmers at a severe competitive disadvantage. So my question is, would this 40-hour work week and the increased cost of American product open our markets to further influx of cheaper foreign products? And what kind of effect would that have for farmers who already compete with those foreign products in our U.S. domestic market?
Again, I think that when you raise your cost structure and you're competing with businesses that have a lower cost structure to produce the same good, it puts you at a disadvantage in the market. I think this would create a lot more difficulty for American farmers to sell their products, especially where they're in a market where there is an easy supply of lower cost produce. And if that's at the northern border, at the southern border, places where there are readily perishable goods coming across the border from a much lower cost structure, it creates huge market pressure for the farmers and could well drive them out of business.
And then my last question, Mr. DeCamp, is there's a lot of discussion between bigger farms and smaller farms, and this mandate would impact all farms, but it would be specifically hurtful and impact small rural family farms. Can you talk about that, how it would specifically hurt those rural family farms?
Well, smaller farms that don't have the same kind of accumulated savings, that don't have the same kind of lifeline, that don't have the same kind of integrated operations that can perhaps function as a loss leader for other businesses within a chain, are unable to weather the storm. They can't deal with short-term or longer-term drops in profitability. they just don't have the resources to do it.
Thank you very much. After a year of unprecedented uncertainty for our family farms, we need to be making it easier and more supportive for them to grow domestic products, not harder with these one-size-fits-all mandates. I yield back.